Hello again, everyone. It's my pleasure to be back up here. And as Samantha said, I'm going to be discussing a little bit today about our Universal Classification Schema, one of the most innovative projects with the biggest potential for change that I've seen in my 6 years of tenure at INHOPE. So, for a bit of background, if you've never heard about the initiative, the Universal Classification Schema is a harmonized system for the assessment of child sexual abuse and exploitation material. So, for a bit of background, why do we need a Universal Classification Schema? From the INHOPE perspective, as we are the ones pushing this initiative forward, we operate in 53 countries around the world. That is 53 different jurisdictions with different standards for what is considered illegal content in these different jurisdictions. Different ages of consent, different types of content related to child sexual abuse that are criminalized in the different countries, and different actions and punishments that can be taken against these different types of content. Our national hotlines also work with their industry partners to get this content removed from the internet. I don't need to explain this to you all, but the terms of service for each platform vary platform to platform and are often more expansive than the national laws around the world. These are differences in the types of content that are allowed on the internet in different countries and different places all over the world. Our national hotlines also work with law enforcement partners to support investigations for identification of victims and offenders, and eventually to support the prosecution of these crimes around the world. These different actions require a different level of granular assessment of content depending on the purpose of the assessment of content. For hotlines, the goal is getting the content removed from the internet. For law enforcement and prosecutors, there's a much higher standard of being able to prove a crime has committed and eventually complete the case to prosecutorial closing. All of these different actors in this ecosystem work together for protection of children, but all of these different actors assess content in different ways and hash material that is assessed in different ways and in different levels of granularity depending on the use cases of the different organizations. This means that the hash databases in play around the world by many of us in this room are not comparable and difficult to use outside of the context in which they were created, given the differences in national laws. Now, outside of even just the assessment of content and the hashing of content for comparability, definitions differ depending on who is discussing the content. This makes it very difficult for us as an ecosystem to have unified conversations about the prevalence, the scale of the issue, and the trends that we are seeing from country to country and organization to organization. What is child sexual exploitation to one country may be very different in another country. And this makes it challenging to understand how the rate of this crime is perceived and seen and identified around the world. And this is particularly witnessed within our context as a network of hotlines assessing content. We require re-review of content as we send content between countries, given that we cannot know the national legislations of every country we operate in. This is a massive strain on analysts, on law enforcement operators, and on content moderators. In the future, we're hoping to change that. So, this project started in 2022. With all of those difficulties in mind, we brought together all of the major actors who assess and categorize content in the line of their work and have used categorization systems such as the industry A1 to B2 standard, or within the UK, categories A through C. We sat down all these actors, both in face-to-face settings, as well as a series of online calls. Many people in this room and watching online have participated in over the course of a year to identify all possible characteristics of online child sexual abuse and exploitation material. All of these characteristics were compiled with the goal of being able to map to any national legislation or any national categorization system that any of us operate in. These characteristics that were identified were compiled into a set of labels and definitions that make up the Universal Classification Schema as it stands today. So, What does the schema look like? It is broken down into 3 key sections, which are designated for different use cases. The schema has been designed with the knowledge that we are all busy entities. We don't have time for implementing levels of granularity outside of our use cases, and we have certain actions that we oversee while others are not related to the line of work. So we have designed the schema to be able to be used in any different scenario by any different actor related to the assessment of child sexual abuse material. So the first section of the schema is the categorization section. This relates to any of the characteristics needed for the determination of illegality of content. This is the assessment identifiers for understanding if the content is illegal when viewing an image or video. Up next is the investigative section. These are characteristics that are not determining factors in the illegality of content, but are useful for the investigation of the cases that involve this material, that support the identification of victims, of offenders, of geographic locations, and things such as these. And then lastly, the demographic section. This involves ethnicity, gender, the presence of face, and interactions between adults and minors. These are designed for the development of tools and the training of data sets. These are very granular labels that are included for these purposes with the understanding that they're not relevant for everyone, but in the future will be very useful for the identification of trends and the training of tools. So, how do you use the Universal Classification Schema? There are a couple of different avenues for use depending on your specific role and organization type, as well as capacity for changing of processes. First and foremost are the 3 key target groups for assessing content: hotline analysts, law enforcement officers, and content moderators. We offer a training program free of charge for all of our partners for understanding how to apply schema labels to visual content. It is one activity to understand the meaning of words and definitions. It is a very different activity to apply these words and definitions to content that you are viewing, and it requires a training program for honing this ability within the moderator, law enforcement operator, or analyst. And so upon completion of the training program, these are then certified professionals for the use of the schema in practice to assessing content. Now, not all of us in this room assess content as a part of our role. In fact, I believe many of you don't. But we all use systems and tools for these processes themselves. So we are also supporting the integration of the schema within the tools that are used for content assessment. This includes hotline content moderating systems, any law enforcement tools for the assessment of content, trust and safety tools, and then our platform ICAM, which is used for the exchange of CSAM interjurisdictionally. And with this is the acknowledgement that most of us can't afford to change our tools to meet more granular assessment processes. The goal of the schema is not to ask people to change how their workflows operate or to change their tools, but to help us understand how the systems they use, both for categorization and for the assessment of content, can map to the schema so we can understand the data being generated in any country and any organization around the world. So we support the mapping of content to the schema to understand how one system relates to the schema so we can begin to translate between these systems around the globe. So we've been doing this work since 2022. Here's where we've come so far. We have had over 500 requests by interested users for the schema from all different sectors and over 90 countries around the world. We have trained over 80 people now on using the schema for the assessment of content, and we have supported the integration of the schema into over 30 tools, research projects, policy papers, and administrative systems for the assessment of content. And we are hoping to expand this further. Standardization is only as good as the uptake it has, so we are hoping that we can support those of you in this room for the use and implementation of the schema within your workflows, tools, systems, and processes. You can request your copy of the Universal Classification Schema via the QR code on screen. This is an access request form, and we meter access to the document not because we're trying to hoard it, but because it is a living document that goes through annual updates to meet the trends and new legislations that are coming into play in the ecosystem. It is a document that is maintained by the experts who created it to begin with, and so they update it every year throughout a variety of meetings to make it fit for purpose continually as AI and different technologies affects how we all work. And so please do fill out this access request form. And over the coming days, please feel free to come up to me with any questions about the document. Additionally, I'm available for any conversations about processes and uptake, but we also have the co-author of the schema in the room with us, Katarzyna Niszka from NASC. Very thrilled to have you with us today. And she is the expert on any of the contents of the document itself if you have questions about the labels or definitions. So thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to continuing this conversation.